Hello friends, and welcome to my favorite books of 2024 YouTube edition. Because we're trying our hand at YouTube. I actually made a completely other video that was going to be my original YouTube debut, me reading an unspecified Colleen Hoover book, but I realized that the lighting was going crazy in all my clips. I'm still trying to figure that out. Obviously, I'm a TikToker. I'm not a YouTuber, so this is all new for me and all new for y'all too. So we're gonna figure it out together. There's a truck. See, like I was not expecting / predicting that, but we had that happen. So things like that, we're going to start fresh on this page, and we're gonna finally post a video because I've just been putting it off. But anyway, back to the things. A lot of y'all did ask about my favorite books of 2024. I did post a TikTok about it almost a month ago, so people have kind of forgotten that I even spoke about it. But all together, I have my books here and behind me. We have, I think, 8 fiction, 4 nonfiction, and then 3 kind of runners up to speak about. So yeah, this is a little nerve-wracking. As you can tell, I'm not used to this horizontal formatting and figuring out lighting and camera settings and all those super fun things. So give me some grace, maybe. We'll see when I'm editing this if it's as horrible as I think it is. But let's get into the books of 2024. I think I read like 92, 93 books in 2024. So overall, I feel like this is a pretty good stack to go through. Let us begin with the 3 runners up. I'm gonna lean back because this is YouTube. We're getting real casual with this. I can speak for as long as I want, as opposed to TikTok. Miss TikTok, where I'm like, oh my god, if you speak over 9 minutes, everyone's going to hate you. Okay, first up, we have the Impusium, which upon first reading, I called the Impusium. Very quickly learned that that is not the actual title. So if you're learning that now, here you go. This says it is a health resort horror story, and it is about a young man, I believe he's like 18 or 19, Polish young man, who goes to this health resort further off into the European wilds, which I'm allowed to say that because I am Hungarian, so let me be ignorant for 2 seconds about Europe. He goes off to this health resort further off because he heard there are really good doctors, and I believe he has tuberculosis. I can't pronounce that word correctly for the life of me, but he has that. And he's going to this health resort to try to fix his health, and apparently the mountain air is supposed to be good for his health, etc. And he gets there and he gets put in this kind of boarding house hotel situation with a bunch of men who just love to philosophize and drink and talk about their opinions on women and their dislike of women. And a lot of this book is really just philosophizing about different subjects, but then there's the occasional hint of like a horror supernatural aspect. We get this idea that there's this entity that is watching them this whole time, and then the hotel / innkeeper's wife passes away, I think, and then they're trying to figure out why she died, and all these things happen. Overall, this is a very gloomy book, very Eastern European, although I think it's technically set in Central Europe. But as an Eastern European, I'm allowed to say that again. And I feel the vibes are very Eastern European. This is very much so, if you've just watched Nosferatu and you're looking for books with similar vibes, I would recommend this one because it has very dark, creepy, damp vibes, and I really enjoyed it. This is my first time reading anything by this author. I do want to read her other book, something about the bones of the dead. I do not recall the title right now, but I'm going to pick that up once I am off my book buying ban that I created for myself. Yeah, I know. As a whole, big fan of this. It is a runner-up. It was not a top favorite because I kind of wanted a little more horror to this as opposed to the very much so amount of philosophizing that we get, but still really liked the atmosphere of it and the vibes. So that is her, and the cover is stunning, and I got a signed edition at the Strand when I was in New York. More you know. Next up, we have Perfume and Pain by Anna Dorn. This is about a woman author who's living in LA, and technically she is getting canceled. I honestly don't recall the reasons why she is getting canceled. I think there's like a Zoom or something she does for other upcoming authors, and she says something that people don't agree with, so that's the reasoning. Let's read the back. It's been a minute since I read this. She has a love of perfume, which I do also, and the publisher sent me a little perfume sample with this. Thank you so much, Simon & Schuster, for doing that, even though this was months, like so long ago. But anyway, back to the point. She loves perfumes, she is a lesbian, and she falls for her new neighbor, who's, I think, kind of older. And at first they don't like each other, and then she slowly develops this fixation on her neighbor. And it's just a very messy girl book, very queer, sapphic, messy girl book, and I really enjoyed it. Again, not going into the top favorites of the year, but definitely up there as one that I really enjoyed. I almost said this year, last year. Yes. I really hope the lighting in this ends up not being crazy, because I'm going to be really pissed off when I edit this. Last for the runners-up, we have Woo Woo by Ella Baxter. This is a very recent runner-up. I read it not even a few weeks ago. This is about a female artist in her 30s who is having her upcoming exhibition in a week, and you kind of follow the week up to said exhibition and just the chaos of it. She has a stalker that she's trying to deal with, and then things get a little bit fantastical, weird. The reviews for this are really bad on Goodreads, which is interesting to me, but also not, because I get why they're bad. This is very much so an art world book, and I feel like if you haven't dipped your toes in the art world to any extent, you're not really going to understand it. It is very much so a satire on the art world. I thought it was hilarious. I went to art school. There's my degree, and my dog's barking. So I thought it was great. I really do know people who are so dramatic and exaggerated, like the characters in this book, so I thought it was fantastic. If you don't know those types of people and you're not in that kind of social situation, you are not going to like this. You're probably going to think this is ridiculous, as many people that I know have thought, and that's okay. Y'all do your thing, we'll do our thing. But I really like this. And then I ordered Ella Baxter's previous book because I really, really liked her writing, and then I had to DNF that 40 pages in because it had one of my least favorite things, which is a dead mom plot. I can't read that, so sorry to Miss Ella Baxter. Maybe one day I'll try again and have a mental breakdown, but for now, we're going to stick to her. Woo woo. Let's do nonfiction, and then we'll get into the fiction, considering that that is like the largest category of things. I have 4 fiction books. Nope. I have 4 nonfiction books, as I said. First up, we have Consent, a memoir. This is a tiny little thing. I read this in one sitting. I think it's 100 and something pages. So fast. This is about our author's relationship with her art teacher. She got into a relationship with her art teacher when she was 18, and he was in his 40s, and they ended up continuing to see each other, and then they got married, and the author's husband eventually passes away because he's older. And in light of the Me Too movement and all of that going on, our author kind of reflects back on her relationship with this man / her teacher, and she realizes that things maybe weren't as great as she originally thought. It's also really interesting because she did write a memoir about her relationship prior, like 20 or something years prior. And she's also reflecting back on that original memoir as opposed to how she feels about things now that he has passed away, and she had this time to kind of reflect on everything going on. And this was just so fascinating to see this woman and her relationship with this man based on ideals back when they first started dating, and then how things in society and just thought process-wise have changed now. And I want to recommend this to everyone. It's so short. Like, if you want a memoir that's really going to make you think, she is the one. And I just really, really liked it. I did end up picking up this author's, I usually don't say the author's names because I don't want to butcher their names because I'm good at doing that. So I just say the author. Okay, anyway, this is YouTube. I can ramble. I did pick up one of her fiction books, set in Florida, which a lot of y'all know. I live in Florida, and I really enjoyed that. So we'll probably be reading more things by her. I'm kind of curious to read the original memoir that she wrote about her marriage, maybe to just compare and contrast. But she kind of did that anyway. So we'll probably be reading more things by her. I'm kind of curious to read the original memoir that she wrote about her marriage, maybe to just compare and contrast. But she kind of did that anyway. So I don't know if I need to do that for myself or her, but that's that. Very, very good. Then we have Strangers to Ourselves, Unsettled Minds, and the Stories That Make Us by Rachel Aviv. This is about mental illnesses that don't really fit into the parameters of typical mental illnesses. Our author finds a couple of people, I think there's 4 or 5 people that each chapter focuses on. And like I said, they have people who have mental illnesses, but they can't really be diagnosed as the typical ones and the typical brackets / parameters for what they are. They don't fit into the box real neat and nice and tidy. And I thought this was so interesting to see that and see these examples of these people. It is very fascinating. I was particularly drawn to Rachel's own story, which is the prologue, and then a woman that Rachel met in her treatment program that ends up being the epilogue of the book is like that woman's chapter. Those 2 really, really stuck with me, and honestly, those 2 have made this a favorite. The other ones were very interesting, obviously, but like I said, those 2 were the ones that struck home. If you're interested in nonfiction about mental health, I think this is a very key book, and it is very, very different from anything I've ever read. So then in kind of the same mental health vein, we have Committed on Meaning and Mad Women, a memoir. This is about our author's time in a mental institution in New York in the 90s, and it's just kind of a typical memoir about her time spent there. And then the other chapters are her focusing on various female writers / artists who also had work or writing about them being in mental institutions, programs, etc. So it's part her memoir and then part her kind of comparing her own experiences to these other women and seeing what differs, what doesn't, what's remained the same, etc. And I keep saying all these are fascinating, but again, so fascinating. And just kind of the idea of the mad woman and women in these psychiatric care facilities. There's so many preconceived ideas that people already have about women who end up in those kinds of situations, and I think work about it is so important because we need to just kind of expand those because they tend to be quite hurtful in a lot of cases. And she kind of goes into that in this. If anything I said sounds interesting to you, her. Last for my nonfiction favorites, we have Carrie Carolyn Coco, My Friend, Her Murder, and An Obsession with the Unthinkable. This is about our author's friend Carolyn Bush, who was murdered by her roommate in New York City in, I think, 2016. Yeah. And then our author was not close friends with Carolyn, but kind of acquaintances. They wanted to become close friends, but then obviously that couldn't happen for horrible reasons. So the author kind of took it upon herself to figure out who Carolyn was as a person, and she did this through interviewing friends, family, people who knew her, going back to her hometown. They both lived in Florida growing up, so she goes back. She goes to St. Pete, which is where Carolyn is from, and kind of figures out this woman's history. And then meanwhile, she's also following the trial of the person, the murderer who killed Carolyn, and kind of looking at this kind of boys' club situation that was going on at the college that both Carolyn and her murderer went to, and how that may have affected what did end up happening in the end, and the causes for this man killing this woman seemingly out of nowhere. Again, I'm going to say, this was fascinating. It was heartbreaking. I think if you consume any sort of true crime media, this is something that should be on your list to read. It is so important and it is such a different look at true crime. It is focused on the victim, which, as if you know true crime, it's hardly ever focused on the victim. We know so much about these horrible people that do these horrible things, and the victims just kind of go unnamed and they just go into the background of history. But this does not let that happen to Carolyn, and it is so heartbreaking. This deep dive that our author does into the college is, again, fascinating and horrifying to see these kind of higher ups in this school that had this way of treating boys at the school and brushing things under the rug and examining these things and seeing maybe if those things didn't happen, if these people didn't act this way, then maybe in the end, the thing that happened to Carolyn, her murder, wouldn't have happened. I once compared this to I'll Be Gone in the Dark. If you've read I'll Be Gone in the Dark, I'll Be Gone in the Dark by Michelle McNamara, I find that similar in the sense that both this and then Michelle's book have that aspect of the personal. Michelle talks about her experiences and her searching for the Golden State Killer, and then this kind of talks about Carolyn's experiences and everything. So I think if you want to do like a heart-wrenching, horrifying double read, those would go well together. Then we have the 8 fiction books to talk about. First up, we have Open Throat. This is, again, tiny book. This is about a sentient queer mountain lion who lives in the Hollywood Hills, and he is just kind of walking around, exploring, and making observations about humanity and the things he sees. Doesn't sound super intriguing. It is. This ended up being so interesting. Oh my god, if I say that word one more time. I don't even know what to replace it with. Fascinating. This ended up being so much deeper than I expected. I did cry at the end, which again, I was not expecting to feel so deeply for this mountain lion walking around, this gay mountain lion. Like, what? I loved it. And everyone else who's read it that I've heard from has also loved it. So just read it. Next up, we have The Rabbit Hutch by Tess Gunty. This is a very hard book to describe, but I'm going to try my best. So basically, there's this low-income apartment complex / housing complex in Indiana, fictional city in Indiana. And we start off the book by going inside one of these apartments and learning that there has been a potential murder of a young girl / woman. And then the rest of the book is kind of leading up to that initial event and you finding out what happened, who these people are. Each chapter flip-flops between various residents of this housing complex, and then one of the said points of view are of Blandine, who is our woman / girl who is getting hurt in the initial chapter. And that sounds super chaotic and confusing. Like I said, this is kind of a book that you just need to pick up and give yourself a try at if it sounds interesting to you. I was so drawn in by this. I had this on my shelf for like a year or two and never picked it up. And then one day I read the initial chapter and I was so kind of stunned by the writing. And I ended up loving this so much. I cried. I underlined so much of it. This book is great. And a couple people have said that they read it because of me and they loved it. And I love hearing that when y'all tell me that, because I feel like maybe my opinions are good sometimes. It says it is a love poem to anyone who has ever felt trapped, left behind, or forgotten and yearned to connect, to be free. I do agree with that. This is such a lovely book. I honestly need to reread it because I think I will get more out of it on a reread. So maybe I'll do that soon. Maybe I won't. Who frickin' knows? Not me. Then we have Pets. This is a book set in New Zealand, partially in the 1980s and then partially in 2014. It is about a young girl. I believe she's 12. Okay. She's 12 and she's super fixated on her new teacher who is super fabulous and cool and lovely. I'm sure you all know, if you were a younger girl at school, there was probably one teacher that you were like, am I in love with this teacher, or do I want to be her, or what's going on? That's how our main character feels about this teacher, and she ends up becoming the teacher's pet. This teacher has a notion of creating teachers' pets and kind of encouraging that behavior, which already questionable, but that's what's going on. And then things just kind of slowly unravel into chaos. I don't want to get too much into it because I ended up reading this and I was shocked by where it ended up going. Was completely not expecting that, and I don't really want to give it away because I want people to be able to feel what I felt. But I loved this. I loved the writing. I loved the story. It ended up being much darker than I thought it would be, which was quite, not gonna say the word, fascinating. And once you read it, the cover becomes so much more significant, which is also a fun time. I've noticed that these Europa editions, while they're lovely to hold, they kind of don't hold up well. Like, look, I already have, the ink is like leaking. I just read Mrs. S, which is also a Europa edition. And that's already kind of like coming apart too. So Europa edition, what's going on? What's going on, besties? But like the feel is so good. Okay. Bridget, this is about books, not about book design and book binding and such. I guess it could be though at the end of the day. My partner is currently getting his chest and neck tattooed, if anyone cares. And I'm a little nervous for him to come home with a neck tattoo. So there's my life update. Next, we have They're Going to Love You, the book. This is about ballet, which I thought I would not care about, but I ended up caring about. In the grander scheme of things, this is about a daughter and a father, and the father divorced the daughter's mother. They were both ballerinas. Well, I think the dad is a dance teacher. I read this right at the beginning of last year, so like forgive me if I'm not remembering everything. We find out in the beginning that the dad is dying and the daughter is called back to New York, which is where the dad lives. She lives in LA. She is a dance choreographer and she's called back, but we learn that there's this big dramatic event that led them to not speak for however many years, like 15 to 20 years, I don't remember. And then again, we kind of backtrack throughout the rest of the story to figure out what happened between these two and why they were not speaking and the kind of, I want to say blast radius, but that's not the right term. But the blast radius, sure, of this event that happened that caused them to not speak. And then them kind of reconciling or maybe not, etc. So very much so about familial relationships. I was not expecting this to hit as hard as it did. I was sobbing at the end of this book. Again, did not expect for that to happen. That was a very surprising thing that I did not see coming. But I loved it. I thought it was so unique. I'm not going to say interesting. I don't think you need to be into dance or ballet to enjoy this. I'm very honest about these things. Like, for example, people told me you don't need to be into hockey to read Beartown. I don't agree with that, y'all. As someone who just read Beartown. I guess maybe have a little bit of interest in ballet and dance, but it's not really like the main focus of the book. If you want to cry, pick her up. Then we have Miss Kitten Tits. I've talked about this book so much over on ye olde TikTok. This is about our 10-year-old called Molly, and she lives in this fire, slightly burnt down halfway house with her father. There's ghosts in there, and they just have this weird living situation. And then a 20-something-year-old girl who just got out of jail moves in with them, and Molly becomes super fixated on her in the way that only a young girl can become fixated on a older teenage cool person. Don't want to give away too much, but there's so many things that happen in this. We have a pair of evil twins. We have hot air balloons. We have ghost best friends. We have our main character who curses like a sailor. So if you don't like that, you're not going to like this book. She is very vulgar and a 10-year-old, but I thought it was so good and funny and so unique. Which is kind of just me repeating interesting again, but love it. Couple people have read this because of me and have not liked it. Don't tell me that. Or I guess tell me that. I don't really care. But also, despite all of those super fun, kind of lighthearted things, this is such an interesting, I said interesting again. This is such a profound exploration of grief and the way that affects people, especially younger girls / children. So, a super fun grief book. I don't know. Housemates. I love this cover. I love the colors. Slay. Okay. This is about two roommates who decide to go on a road trip in, I think, Pennsylvania, rural Pennsylvania. One is a writer and one is a photographer, and they combine their joint sleigh to create this picture of rural Pennsylvania / America / road trips. This is about art, queer relationships, queer love, friendships, museums, men in the art world, being a woman in the art world, being a non-binary person in the art world, all of those things. I thought it was great. Again, some people don't like this, and that's okay. Obviously, that's okay. It's not okay. You're done. If you don't like this, it's over. The formatting is also quite unique because we have this artist kind of narrating the whole situation, watching them as this like all-encompassing force that kind of sees everything and is seeing these other two main characters go about their things. And then I guess our narrator artist had a similar kind of relationship with a different artist. Just read it. Then we have Hungerstone. This is an arc. This comes out February 18th, so soon. Do not worry, my chickies. This is, quote unquote, a feminist retelling of Carmilla. Carmilla is the original vampire tale that came before Dracula, and it is queer. It is about two women. Basically, like I said, this is a retelling of Carmilla. I read this before reading Carmilla. Did that affect my reading of it? Not really. Carmilla did not live up to my expectation, but this did. This was such a fantastic little gothic tale, and I loved it. There were some twists and turns that I was completely not expecting. I was shook by, so that was super fun, and I'm really excited to see what people say about this once it is actually out. Last but not least, we have The Reformatory. I'm sure you've heard many people talking about this. This is about a young boy in Jim Crow era Florida who gets in an altercation with a white man's son because the son is harassing our main character's sister, and he kicks the white boy, which ends up with horrible repercussions for our young black boy in this community. He gets sent away to this reformatory school that is based on the real Dozier School for Boys, and he realizes he can see ghosts. And that isn't even the horror of the story, because this is a horror novel. It's like historical fiction horror. But we end up learning quite quickly that the horror of this novel is not based on the supernatural. It is very much based on the real things happening at the school, real things that did happen at the school. And it is absolutely horrifying, but so beautifully written. It is quite a longer book, but I'm telling you, once you get invested in these characters, I flew through this. I wanted to know what was going on, what was going to happen, despite me being absolutely horrified by a lot of the content. I believe that the Nickel Boys, if that's the title of the book, is also based on the Dozier School for Boys. This is, I guess, more of a fantastical horror telling of it. I believe that's just literary fiction, but heard very great things about that too, so I might pick that up. There's also a nonfiction book that I've been reading about the Dozier School for Boys slowly but surely on my Kindle. I think it is called We Carry Their Bones. I'll put the picture in here, but that's kind of a nonfiction account of the school and the events that take place in this book, so if you're ever curious about that, that is a great place to start. So important. I think everyone should read this, and I want to read more by this author. I was actually watching Dragula, if y'all watch that show, and this author was a guest judge, so that was really cool. That is all for my favorite books of 2024. Now I can finally take all of these books out of my office and return them to their respectful bookshelves downstairs. So that's going to be so nice for me and my Virgo OCD brain. But that's all. If y'all have any thoughts, feelings, comments, opinions about any of these books, please let me know. I love to talk to you guys. If anyone even watches this on the YouTube, love you guys. Goodbye. I'll see you next time.